Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Item number 5, we're going to receive information on the Scott County Delivers topic, Facilities Asset Management. I'm glad it was you, not me. I got mine out of the way earlier.
Talk with you today about asset management. Really, the purpose of this Scott County Delivers is to talk about how we are using technology to better manage assets and resources within the county, and specifically today focused on buildings, facility asset management. So that is certainly the efficient and the wise use of our assets goes directly to the cost of government. And that's why we're here to talk about this today, that our costs of government relate to how well we take care of those things that we've been entrusted with. And Brad Davis and Joe Weta and their teams are going to talk with us about that. This topic is also really aligned with the strategic plan that talks about designing and implementing business model changes. And you're going to hear a lot about the work that they've done to plan and then implement improvements into how they do their work. So we're excited to talk about that as well. We have a number of people who are going to be speaking remotely. So I'd like to do some introductions of people in the room. Then we'll ask the people who are appearing remotely to do their introductions, and then we'll get started. Can we start with you?
Sure. Jake Rusing, Scott County Library Director, here on the panel.
Brett Davis, Director of Planning and Resources Management here at the county.
Joe Weta, Infrastructure and Operations Manager at the county.
Brandon, could you introduce yourself and put your video on, please?
Sure, can you see me? Yep. Okay, good. My name is Brandon Roberts, and I'm the Program Specialist for Facilities.
Chad?
Chad Weller, and I'm a maintenance worker down in facilities.
Thanks. Chris?
Chris Ross, I'm a GIS analyst.
Thank you. And Jen?
Hi, Jen Dane, Three Rivers Park District, and I'm an administrative specialist for the maintenance department.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, I think we'll get started. Brad, I wonder just if you could start out by just talking a little bit about the narrative that you put together talks about the Scott County Facilities Management Strategic Plan and kind of the 4 main elements of that. And I'm wondering if you could just sort of summarize for the board the direction that plan is taking your departments related to asset management.
You bet. Thank you, Chris. So about 5 or 6 years ago, a small group of staff started helping the facilities department look at their long-range strategic plan. What are the long-range needs for the department? What are the long-range needs for the county? And that process, we took a look at a lot of different topics. And one of the key things we looked at is we need to do a better job managing our assets and making sure that we know exactly when the life cycle of those assets occur, how long do we need to continue to maintain certain assets before it's more efficient and cost-effective to actually start replacing those assets. And so we started doing a lot of that inventory work and coming up with what we think is a much better capital replacement plan. And you see that every year as part of the CIP, you see a chapter just on building improvement plan, or what we call the BIP. And that looks at what are the needs in the county over the next several years, what are the major investments. And able to really stay on top of those investments, we needed to have some really good software too, to make sure that we know how often are those big assets being inspected, how long are they going to maintain, what's their warranty period, all that data. We needed a central location to really capture that data, and that led to a recommendation to invest in some new asset management software. We'll talk about Cartograph. It became Cartograph. We'll talk about that software a lot here over the next hour. Some other big items that came out of the plan was the recognition that we're going to start needing more space. And we looked at some historic space studies for the county and some different ideas. But it was really this study that said, you know what, we need to really take a serious look. It led us to hiring Wold Architects to do a space needs study that ultimately led to the decision to invest in another major building here on campus and some other buildings out in our public works area. Finally, another big aspect of the plan that we're probably just starting to get into is more of that operations plan. We want to have a really good operations plan for each building to determine what are the needs, what are the staffing needs for each of our buildings, what is going to be the staffing needs for our new building, and as we start looking at getting out of other buildings, how do we move staff around? And so that's going to be another important upcoming work for facilities. So I'd say it was those 4 areas that we really, I think, took facilities management here at the county and kind of have them think longer term in the future. What are some key things that we want to accomplish?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Chad, you had, and I'm going to invite the folks that are presenting remotely to just jump in, but occasionally I have like a specific person to direct a question to. So there's a nice write-up in the narrative, Chad, from some of the work that you did collecting the information for asset management, asset management software. And I'm wondering, in there, it says that you have really done quite a lot of work, completed the asset management inventories for many of the buildings, and that you are still working on the regional training facility and the JAF. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what the plan is for completion of that so that that data set in Cartograph is whole.
Well, actually, I have completed the regional training facility and JAF.
Oh,
What I have left to do is the new building, basically.
okay.
So,
Can you say a little bit about that? Are the assets in the new building will be entered into Cartograph as they're installed in the new building, or what's our plan for the new building inventory?
well, right now, basically all the assets are in the building.
Okay,
I haven't had a chance to go over there because the building's not completed yet.
I can answer
So-
that question a little bit better, maybe.
sure.
I'm working with Dustin Kruger in the facilities department. He is going to be providing me, along with Wold and KA, a list of the assets, the location of the assets, hopefully a lot of the pertinent details for each of the assets. And hopefully we'll be able to just basically dump that information straight into Cartograph and not rely so much on the work Chad has had to do in the last year. All that information will be up to date. We'll have pictures and everything. So it should be, hopefully, cross your fingers, a pretty easy process working along with Dustin and Kay especially.
Nice. Who is the best person to speak to? What are just in a short period of time, what are what's the value added that Cartograph is bringing to our organization?
This is Chris. I'd say accountability is kind of the biggest piece of it. We know the goal of this is to know everything about every asset that we have, from the time it's installed, the cost that it took to purchase it, how much time we're spending maintaining it. It's kind of an all-encompassing summary of all of our assets. So it's kind of everything, and we can point back to everything we've done and say, this is how much time and money we've spent on every one of our assets.
So getting to that true cost.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Before I turn it over to Jake, I wanted to ask something. In the narrative section on page 4, there's a section on what's working well, and there's also a section on what's not working well. And what caught my eye on this is that you folks, as you have gone forward to implement Cartograph, had some difficulty with staff buy-in or staff use of the new system. And I wonder if we could talk about that because, a few months ago, Cindy Geist led a Scott County Delivers where we talked about technology and some difficulties getting the full value out of those systems. And so I wonder if we could talk about what you learned through that process that might be helpful to other people.
I think a big piece of it was really on the training, and getting the maintenance staff used to the software. I mean, we had a previous program that did some of it, but this is obviously a little higher end level, a little more sophisticated, a lot more detail. And some of the guys, that took a little bit longer to get them, used to the fact that it's going to take a little bit longer to enter data, or things may look a little different. But I think the biggest thing is just to take the time and not just dump it on them and say we got to be at this level, but just to take incremental steps to make sure we're getting all the data in there correct, all the processes in there correct. And you'll see in maybe a little later in some of the data, you'll see those spikes in some of our graphs where it'll detail those issues, but we're working diligently to get through those, and they're doing good with it.
Okay. Do you have any specific things that you're doing right now, any strategies to up staff utilization of the system?
Yeah, as far as staff, I mean, it's staff-wise, they're using it to its full potential. I think maybe where we're lacking a little bit still is some of the forecasting pieces, but we're really at a good point with this software implementation. We've made a lot of investment in new air handlers, rooftop units, roofs, like I mentioned before, the new building. So we're really at a good time where a lot of the assets are new. So now moving forward to collect this data, but in turn, we need to get the program set right to be able to do that forecasting for the future.
Sure.
We have a great facilities staff, and anyone that works in our buildings knows that our staff will just do anything to solve the problem, and often they just want to fix the problem and not necessarily think about, now I got to go back to my desk and enter some data into a software system. They're used to just, resolving the issue. And so that was part of the training. It's just as important to spend that time to put the information in. And so I know Joe had worked with staff to at least identify time in their day, whether it's morning or over the midday or near the end of the day, to just make sure that you carve out that time to do that work. And I know Brandon too then offers some weekly and monthly reports on some activities. That's a way for, I think, everyone to just kind of make sure everyone's staying true to staying on those tasks. And Brandon, do you want to talk a little bit about those reports and how staff has found any benefit from those reports?
Sure, yeah. So I try to run a weekly report to showing what everybody currently has due, and then what they have completed in the last week. One, to kind of just show accountability. Two, to show management exactly what's going on within the department. And showing the weekly data, I think, hopefully helps keep all the workers on track and motivated to stay on top of the PMs that have due dates. And then also we run a monthly report which shows a much greater scheme all the work that's being done within the whole county, breaking down work percentages, average time, all that kind of information that hopefully someone can use to make better decisions in the long run as far as, who's doing what and when.
Nice. Thank you. Well, let's take a look at some of that data. Or did you have other?
Can
jump
I
right
just
in.
ask a question while we're on the topic of cartograph at maybe a higher level? A big software like that, it usually comes with all the bells and whistles, and then maybe you end up using 20% of the features on a regular basis, and there's 30% that you're happy they're there, you use infrequently, and then maybe 50% that nobody ever uses at all. Could somebody here ballpark what percentage of the features we're currently using? And then if there is room to grow, where would you like to see that happen?
I could probably answer that, if that's okay.
Brandon, if you can answer that for the county, and then if I can ask Jen or Brad to maybe respond to that question for Three Rivers. I think it's a great question.
Yeah, so I think maybe I would estimate it at about 50% would probably be a good bet. What we are doing is the daily work, staying on top of all of our preventative maintenance and requests. But what we aren't doing, Joe mentioned earlier, was more of the future scenario building kind of data that the system can provide once that information's in. Once we are able to perform inspections and come up with different scenarios, that will show us, as far as BIP or even CIP, what kind of assets will need to be replaced when. And that's a big part of the system that currently we're still building up. And hopefully within the next year, we'll be able to show some data for that. Technology-wise, there is some work that they're still doing with Paragraph One, which is their iPhone app. So far, it hasn't really worked so well for us, but I know, talking to Cartograph, they are still investing a lot of time and money into the app. So we're hoping with that technology, it will make the guys more mobile, which will then get them out, being able to do more work and not spend so much time implementing data and data entry, which no one really wants to do in truth. So as of right now, I'd probably guess around 50%, and we have a plan as far as, what that next 50% should be in the next year, executing and all that.
Nice, thank you. Jen, did you want to respond to that question?
I'm wondering, I also have Simon Morgan here with Three Rivers Park District, and he's on the GIS end of things, and I'm wondering if maybe Simon would chime in, I guess, and talk about the capacity of what the cartograph system has to offer, and I guess how we are using it and at what capacity. Because I know he kind of oversees multiple departments, and because we have many departments that are using cartograph, and I just kind of work with the maintenance part of it. So Simon, would you be able to help answer that?
My name is Simon Morgan. I'm the Senior Manager for GIS and Business Applications at Three Rivers Park District. We use Cartograph across multiple departments, as Jen alluded to. We're using it in our maintenance department, in our forestry and natural resources departments, in our IT department, and then also our donation and volunteer departments are using it to manage like memorial trees and memorial benches and that kind of thing. I think as last time I looked, we had 45 different asset categories in our system, and we have a list of 20 different asset categories on our to-do list to add in for 2021. We have about 125 users across all those departments, and some departments are just using it as a place to store the data about assets, other departments are using it to manage the day-to-day operations of managing those departments. So it's quite a variety of use cases in the park district. Sadly, there was a bit of a glitch on the audio on my side, so does that answer the question, or was there more?
Yeah.
I think so. Thank you, Simon. All right. So Cartograph provides better information. There's some time savings. There's some accountability. There's maybe some room to grow yet. Is that a good summary of where we are with Cartograph at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move into the data, and we may have some of those system level questions to come back to. Do you have a data question, Jake?
I do. Well, we can start on page 12. Perfect. In the right spot.
Okay. Oops, let me get this out of here. I don't know if I can get it out of there without
That's okay.
losing it.
So on page 12, in the why does this matter, it's a good graphic showing the total operating costs per square foot for a few of our facilities. How does that compare with industry standards? Are we comparing favorably, not favorably? How are we looking compared to others?
Yeah, I'll start the answer, and if others want to jump in. When we were preparing the strategic plan back in the about 2013, 2014, at that time, the industry standard was about $4 to $6 per square foot. And that's generally, if you kind of take the average across all 8 buildings, we're probably in that industry standard. Obviously, some buildings that we maintain are above that standard. I'd point to the JAF and the RTF. And maybe the HHW building is 2 or 3 that jump out a little bit higher than that industry standard. And I think some people on the call have some ideas of why some of those buildings cost a little bit more than our other buildings. But to answer your question, that's generally the standard. I haven't looked at any updated numbers. It's probably changed a little bit since 5-6 years ago, but I'll turn it over to Joe. Maybe Joe, you can speak to some of the fluctuations you've seen.
Yeah, so like Brad said, remember the industry standards are common office buildings, or like Brad mentioned, we have the RTF, super old building, law enforcement center, which is obviously a jail, JAF. So unique buildings compared to what the industry standard is based off of. Couple of fluctuations in there, like the RTF, it runs pretty good 2015 through 2018, then we have a pretty good spike in 2019. There was some pretty significant work that took place at the RTF that year. Boiler replacements and a sanitary sewer lift station replacement. Now, capital projects are not included in this graph, but there was a ton of work. The old boilers were actually buried on site, which were found, so our highway operations staff went and removed that. There were some flood mitigation things that we did that the highway operations staff did, so that some of that work they did is kind of shown in this higher year for that building. The JAF, the fluctuation in there, small building, really low square foot, so the smallest dollar amount can make that fluctuate. So our biggest thing with that building is any damage caused there by the folks staying there, so that can really offset that number in here. I think relatively looking at it all though, we're sitting year to year is really good, and then weather can also play a factor in this.
So with new technology supporting the asset management going forward, cartograph and maybe the sort of remote system that I think was mentioned in here, but with the HVAC, being able to do some of that work remotely, where would you expect these numbers to go over the next 5 to 10 years through the rest of the facilities management plan?
I would say, if I was to predict, I would say kind of the same, trending flat. I don't expect them to go down by any means. Just because, energy costs, everything else goes up, right? But I think we'll have the biggest thing with the building automation system is more control, moderate the temperatures versus having to have this room up at 76 to keep it at 72, the hot cold. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The cartograph, this is kind of one of those areas that needs to get advanced in the cartograph yet. One of the things that Brandon mentioned is our total cost we still do not have in the software yet. A lot of this is coming out of Lawson, so that's part of that next 50% is making sure we can track all our cost with the one system.
Thank you, Joe. Back over to you.
So that's really like a next step, is trying to merge what's in Infor and what's in Cartograph so that you have one system of record for all this.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Let's look at page 13. I'm just curious, this data is it says from 2017 through 2019, and it's slips, trips at our buildings. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how you use this data, like how do you, like on a daily basis, how do you use this information? And also whether we could start looking at this data annually to know if there are, there's a small number of incidents, like there's not a lot of data sets included in this, but is there a way to look at, are we making any improvements over time? So how do you use this?
I think some of it is, you'll see here in a little bit later as well, is some of the ADA things we've been doing. So the ADA survey is going to show us where there's gaps in the sidewalks, trip hazards, maybe the curb cuts aren't right. So that'll be that part of it. As far as you can see the biggest issue is that the government center in the ice, and it's noted. It's along 4th Street out there, which is shade all day. So the guys can adjust their maintenance routines, which we've done. We've added liquid capabilities to our sidewalk program so that we can treat the areas before any potential snow or ice. So just constantly looking at what we can do to change that effect. And it's going to be more to look at now because it would be the whole extent of 4th with the new buildings. So.
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, that is right. Okay. All right. Whoops. go the other way. Let's talk about utility costs. And I had a couple questions related to this. So, so obviously, when you look at the slide, the thing that stands out is August of 2019, right? So can we just start there? Like, what is that big spike? July of 2019, August of 2019, big spikes in expenses. Do we know? I'm not sure who's the best person to speak to that.
Yeah, so I think we had a calculating glitch in this one between the two. As you can see, in August of 2019 to September 2019, there was no calculation for the government center in that. I got put in the other.
Okay.
But all across the graph,
Yep.
again, this one mostly is related to the weather. So our water and sewer bills, they don't really change a whole lot. The majority of our buildings, they can a little bit with the LEC, depending on the amount of inmates. As far as the rest of the buildings, sewer and water is pretty well flat throughout the years. Your gas and electric is where really things change. You can see February 2019, March 2019, super high, right? Super cold then as well.
Yep.
I went back and looked. So, in the same with July and even the August of 2019, super warm. And it's,
Yeah.
we try to be as efficient as we can. We, during the weekends and overnights, we'll turn the systems way down so that we're not keeping a constant temperature. But if we see weather patterns coming where it's gonna be 100 degrees for 4 days in a row, we keep them systems running so they're not playing catch up and working twice as hard, right? Same in the winter. If we see several nights of sub-zero temperatures, we're gonna keep the boilers rolling all night long and maintaining that versus having to try to play catch up for a whole day later.
Sure. Sure.
As we put in the narrative, we specifically picked these 2 years because staff and management were curious to see if there has been a COVID effect of some of the shutdown and not having as many employees reporting to the buildings to see if that made any impact on our utility costs. I think the graph bears out that there's not a lot of impact. The one area that maybe is worthy of looking a little bit more into is if you just separated the water. I'm guessing the water usage may be much different, but when it comes to the other major utilities, we still had to turn the lights on and heat the buildings regardless if staff was here or not.
Yeah.
But that's why we picked those 2 years, just to see if it gave us any insight.
Yeah, it's a nice display. Okay. Just a couple more questions on the ADA piece. So the goal on this is 100%, correct? Like that we're 100% compliant with ADA. So first of all, is a new building built to be ADA compliant, 100% compliant?
Correct.
Okay. And then how does this data factor into plans to remodel this building?
Yeah, so any areas in the current government center or justice center, any of the areas that are going to be touched by the current remodel will be brought up to ADA standards.
Okay.
The rest of the other areas that need improvement here are going to be part of a forthcoming larger plan that, it's going to be, is it going to take us 5 years and X amount of dollars to get us to 100% compliance? So that's the next stage of this. This part was just the survey itself. And really, I think we're doing pretty good for the age of our buildings and some of the improvements we've made as of recent, but the larger, more comprehensive plan will really get us into that. What's it going to take? What's the dollars it's going to take?
Do you have a target date for when we're fully ADA compliant? Or is that planning yet to do, maybe you said?
That planning, it's, I think as part of that piece of how much really is there, what is the type of work, and the funding.
Are there grants for that, or do those retrofits all come at county expense?
I think for the most part, county expense.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
This, what's on the screen is a screenshot of a dashboard that Chris Ross helped prepare to take all the data that was collected from staff and try to put it in a meaningful format so that we can drill down building by building and look at some of these non-compliance issues. And while we can't show it on a page like this, but we could go to the RTF and know exactly what are the major non-compliant issues. Or in this building, what are the major non-compliant issues? And as everyone knows, this building will go under renovation next year. And as part of that renovation, we'll make sure that we use this information to determine what needs to be retrofitted
Nice.
to become ADA compliant.
Okay. Okay, the next few slides really look at sort of a balance between time and talent spent on preventative maintenance versus regular maintenance, and just sort of how that workflow manages in your areas. So on this slide on page 16, could I ask one of you just to walk through, like, just what story is this data telling you?
I might call on Brandon. Brandon, if you heard the question, you're close to this data. Can you talk to this?
Yeah, sure, of course. So this is comparing the amount of time and the amount of actual tasks, the work that all of our preventative maintenance takes the guys for throughout the whole year. So this data, if I remember correctly, was from January 1st to the end of September, or maybe halfway through, but you'll see that each of our different PMs that we have, that's, everything from an annual PM every 12 months to weekly, broken up by the amount of hours for that PM type, and then also how many tasks, individual times that they've had to perform that task on an asset for each PM type. So you'll see that someone like Chad would, for a lot of the time spent on monthly, that's the biggest that we have out of, currently we have 142 different preventive maintenance plan in the system off of our 1,300 or so assets, and that's how it breaks down.
All right, thank you. Let's look at that a little different way. So this slide looks at sort of a breakdown of where time is spent by your teams. And there's an industry standard that says that there should be a 60 to 75% is kind of the range. The industry standard is range for preventative maintenance. And your teams are almost there. They're at 58%, so almost to that 60% figure. When you look at this breakdown of tasks, like, how do you think about this? There are a lot of areas in the county that are trying to move into more prevention and less reaction, and you guys are doing that work. Like, you're really driven to do that. And so, when you look at this data, how are you moving your folks more into that preventative maintenance? And where would you like to see those numbers a year from now?
Well, I think definitely higher. I think we're sitting really good right now. One part of it where we need to really break this data down a little bit more is some of our PM tasks are on things that might not necessarily be just because you're doing a PM may not result on if something fails with it in the future, like fire extinguishers or checks monthly. That's a preventive maintenance rate, but it's not just because it doesn't have a greaser or a belt may not prevent a task coming out of it. So I think we're sitting really good on what our PM is compared to tasks, but I think it's part of breaking it down a little bit further. Chad or Brandon, do you have a little more to add to that maybe?
Yeah, I would just add that you got to remember too, when looking at this, that other tasks also includes all the work that they do for internal requests that employees send in, and that could be, necessarily could be something on an asset, but a lot of times we're talking about, light bulbs to temperature complaints to odor and pest control, that the whole gamut. So it's hard to compare other tasks to PM because it's not all other tasks are strictly just assets breaking.
Right.
So that number, our percentage in theory could be higher if we removed any kind of request work out of it. And then our 58% would, I'm sure, be much higher than it is now. But just take that into consideration when looking at the other tasks percentage.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So when I was looking at this graph, I was really interested in the other tasks. And Brandon went in the direction my mind went, that how many of those tasks are somebody calling facilities and saying it's too hot where I'm sitting right now, and then 10 minutes later, the same person calls and says it's a little too cold where I'm sitting right now. And then there are all the things of like, I wish my cue ball was a foot that way, or a foot in the other direction, and you come and move it, and then that's clearly not PM, that falls into those other tasks. So my bigger question from that is, what can the business units do to serve you guys as well as you're serving us? Because as Brad said at the beginning, facility staff steps up time and time again to do, the really big stuff and the really small stuff, pretty much without complaint and without fail. So are there things the 40 odd other departments in the county could be doing to support your work?
It's a good question. I think some of it we have remedied. I'll just use, for instance, heating and cooling. Encouraging people to dress for the weather, dress appropriately. We have done some things where we've set our range a little bit different, maybe a little more open, so it's maybe, in the summer is 70 to 74. That way there's, a range, because there's a lot of going around and taking the temperature. It might be 71. Well, it's supposed to be set at 72. So we've kind of gone to more of a range in the buildings, but I think that's one thing in that area is, people dressing appropriately. Now, new building is going to be balanced a lot better than what this, this building is quite old, 40 years old. The biggest part of this building with the renovation is going to be the infrastructure, the HVAC, and it'll be the same thing. We'll get it balanced, and hopefully those issues will take. The rest of them, light bulb goes out, it goes out. There's not much, staff could do for that. I think we've gotten a little bit better as an organization as far as moves as well. And obviously the space study and the new move arounds, new building will help with that as well.
I might redirect that question to Chad, because Chad, I've heard from other facilities staff that sometimes the requests that come in are not that clear at first, and so there's a lot of time spent just trying to really understand what the request is. Can you speak to that or any other aspect of Jake's question?
There's some times when it's not quite clear, but I've, like you guys have been saying, we just step up and do what needs to get done.
Cartograph, when someone, like from an employee uses the internal request portal, there are fields that are mandatory to fill out to submit, and we've made it so you have to submit a certain amount of information so the guys can at least get back to that person and ask more questions if needed. So I think that's another way Cartograph has kind of helped streamline that issue a little bit since 360 in our last system that we used. At least I hope it does. I haven't heard many complaints from the maintenance workers about that.
That's a good example. When you look at this data, like when you think about the new building, or you think about all the growth at the campus out by the highway department, right? The new cold storage building and some of the sheriff's stuff that's out there. And just as you look at that getting bigger, as you look at the new government center, does this kind of data help you plan staffing or resources? Or like, does this in any way, I know that forecasting isn't to the place that you want it to be, but does this data offer you any tools to plan for how are we going to manage these new expanding complexes?
Yeah, I don't know if necessarily this exact slide gives that detail, but more to the individual tasks.
Okay.
We'll give you that detail. Like obviously like the RTF old, there's going to be a lot more tasks, but maybe not as many as a government center where you have several hundred people in it at any given day. So Probably not this exact slide, but more of the breakdown of the workload of the individual staff.
Can we look at that, Joe? Like this one? Is that part of the data that you're referring
Yep.
to? Okay. Okay, so what does this tell you about planning for staff or specialists or project assignments, those kinds of things?
Sure. Just like it says, the task time, the time it takes to time between the request and the task.
Yeah.
And the task time itself. Trying to maintain that pretty good level of the first, 1 through 4 staff there. This data is a little skewed back to the beginning of the session here where we talked about the learning curve. Part of the spikes with number 5 and number 7 were a result of the learning curve. It's not that the work wasn't getting done or the request wasn't getting done. It just wasn't getting entered into the system in a timely manner. So those are the things that the next time we're here, I hope it's to be level across the board. But you can look at, this data and take what was the task, how much time did it take, was it 1 or 2 staff person, and reassigning to different buildings may not be, all 9 of the maintenance workers know each building in and out. So it might be just reassigning for a week, or, if there's a large, one building may have way more annual PMs that in January, maybe we need to reassign an extra employee to that building. So
Sure.
some of that data that helps with that.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Jake, are you ready? All right, and just looking at the last page, looks at the volume of requests by month this year. And so I'm just wondering if you, as you look at this, is this data pretty clear in Cartograph? Like, it seems like one of the big advantages of Cartograph is you're able to track the numbers of tickets and when they're open and closed more closely. That seems like a big advantage that we didn't have before Cartograph. So as you look at this volume of requests, is there anything that you, like when you look at that, January, February, March look pretty high, summer months look a little lower, like are there things that that tells you about the workflow?
Again, yeah, I think the bigger thing with this chart was that learning opportunity again, as you can see.
Okay.
We want every month to look like what September, August, July look like, within 1 or 2 of each other.
Yep.
The January, February, March, April was the guys playing catch up and learning the system and closing out more tickets from the previous month prior to.
So that doesn't necessarily reflect that tickets weren't completed. It reflects that they didn't get entered into the system.
Right, and they might have been in the system that's just not closed out.
Okay.
Right, Brandon?
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to the previous slide as well. When looking at staff number 5, for instance, it says his task time average is 39 days, but I ran a quick report before this meeting, and his average task is closed 6 days before his due dates, typically. So his work is being submitted on time for the most part, but because the due dates could be, up to 12 months for like an annual PM, for instance, they'll sit in his inbox for longer, which would then skew those numbers. So you got to know exactly what each task is asking as far as the due dates go before you can really judge those numbers. And then to kind of talk about the next slide and requests, you have to consider that a lot of those tasks are being, especially those early month tasks are from 2019 that might be due within later, or they just couldn't get done later. Requests don't have due dates. We only can go by how long they're open to how long they're closed. But we can also get a whole lot more information. We can run reports to see which departments are submitting the most requests down to which employees are submitting the most requests, what type of requests we get the most, when we get those requests. There's certain systems that we could implement with Cartograph to help us kind of future-proof certain seasons. and automate a lot of that work for the guys so they don't have to spend so much time in front of the computer to create the requests or the tasks themselves. So this data is really great, I think, as far as the upper level goes on how we can use it to kind of alleviate some of that computer time on the guys, but also get us ready for different seasons and different months ahead of time in a much better, more reliable fashion.
Great, thank you. Okay, I wonder if we could just ask just sort of a general question about, just as you think about taking care of our buildings, just our buildings across, I think there were 13 buildings total, plus parks, plus some towers, like lots of assets. As you think about that, what keeps you up at night?
You know, 8 years ago when I started, I would say, is the building going to be froze up in the morning, or is it going to be 100 degrees at night? How many roof leaks are we going to have? But I think where we're sitting now, the law department has done a lot of good work, and we've had a lot of support by the board with investments. We mostly have after we do the Justice Center and Government Center, we'll have all new roofs out there. So I think with the investments we've made in the last several years,
So in pretty good shape?
I don't lose any sleep on the facility side.
Okay,
Sleeping like a baby.
that's good. That's good news, isn't it?
Isn't that up every 2 hours or is that no?
Try all night.
Yeah.
So we're not getting nickel and dime for that.
Right,
So you put right by keeping up on this stuff.
correct.
That's a good thing.
Is there data, if you're here a year or 2 years from now, is there data that you'd really like to have that you don't have right now that would be meaningful to you?
I think two of the bigger ones for me, I'll say three, is the future forecasting. Being able to look, is air handler 7 performing the same as air handler 8? Is it going to make the 15-year life expectancy, or do we need to plan to get it in, the CIP sooner? Two is the cost, being able to look at the costs and what the buildings are costing us as a whole, the staff time that's going into each of the assets. And then 3 was the, Brad, do you have any? I have a third one, let me think.
Yeah, what do you think? I'm not sure what the data will help us, but I think over the next 3 years, we really got to figure out how to staff or balance our staffing in each building. There's going to be so many changes, obviously, with the new building, the renovation of this building, and whether we just allocate resources that we're going here to the new building. That will get us by for a year at least. We're looking at, in the future, dropping the Workforce Development Center, so that frees up another maintenance staff. So to me, that's going to be a big topic over the next few years, is how to right staff the buildings for the future. And this data will certainly be helpful. I mentioned we're going to do some operation plans for each building, so that's going to be kind of a product. I don't know yet whether we'll have new data coming out of that effort or not, but if we do, we'll certainly want to share that with you.
That was mine, the staffing one.
Can I make a comment
Please.
too? Is that okay? So in reading this, because I've written a couple of these packets in my time here, I think this is maybe the one that had it was absent of any bragging or anything like humble bragging about the work you do. And there was a measure that's not in here that IT tends to talk about a lot, and that's like uptime. So the software network uptime. There's nothing in here about asset uptime or facility uptime. And it's close to, in my experience, close to 100%. And just on behalf of the staff, thank you, because folks like me who face the public directly in the libraries, in health and services, and some parts of the sheriff's office, we get those direct, thank you so much from the people we serve, the people we're here to serve as government. I don't know that those thanks always get back to the folks who make that possible, who provide the foundation for all the services we offer. So just thank you for doing that. There's a lot to brag about.
Well, that was really gracious, and there is a lot to worry about. And I would echo that and also just underline just the extra effort that has gone into being able to bring a few people into this building and what that has meant for your staff and the extra time and commitment that has brought to making sure that rooms are clean and people are spaced out and that there's just kind of really a genuinely responsible kind of approach to that your staff have always presented in this building. So we're really appreciative of that. All of us are really appreciative.
You know, and that was an interesting conversation, because obviously we have staff that want to make these buildings as safe and as safe as possible, the grounds, the buildings, as comfortable as possible for the public. We want people to come here. And so when we had the conversation that we are closing the buildings and we don't want people to come here, I could tell facilities staff that was kind of a knock on their pride a little bit, because they take a lot of pride in having these buildings open to the public and serving the public.
Yeah, that personal responsibility really does shine through as a quality in your team. So, all right, with that, I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to turn it over to the chairman, ask for any questions from the board.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's effort on this. Looking to my left, looking in the digital domain, are there any questions that anyone would like to fire away? I have a couple comments, but we'll wait and see what we get.
I do, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman. I do also want to compliment Joe and the efforts with Cartograph. We got started, we had to put it on hold for a total IT epic. To change project managers more than once through this. And Brandon took a lot of ownership and leadership. I know Mary Keene played a role in it. Chad has been a driver of using and wanting to plan for it. But Joe all along also had a vision of using Cartograph. And to see that this has finally come to fruition, I remember sitting with him and Mary about 4 years ago for a Scott Delers. He's probably smiling in there. I can't see his face, but trying to have any data more than how many light bulbs we changed or how we did it was virtually impossible. And so the effort that has gone into this and the time and the planning, I also know that facilities has been willing to change some of their processes, things like changing cubes up and down. We're going to go away from that and how it's done and what should we do versus what should we contract, and looking at things like 8A and restrooms and upgrading them. It has taken a tremendous amount of effort and work, and just want to say thank you for that. And when I look at the data that I saw here a couple weeks ago at agenda review compared to what we were dealing with 4 years ago, it's tremendous. So thanks for all your efforts and continuing to use this free planning. I'm looking forward to your operational plans.
Thank you very much for that. That light bulb keeps coming up. Have you noticed that? Like, I keep looking for my slide. I'm just wondering if we can put it to bed. Plus I'm only chair for like this meeting and one more meeting. Under my watch, can we put to bed once and for all, how many county folks does it take to change a light bulb? Do we know that yet? We'll answer that later. We'll answer that later. Thanks for getting them changed anyway. Gotta have a little fun, right? Gotta have a little fun.
There's a lot of bulbs here.
There's a lot of bulbs, and those LEDs do not last 10 years, let me tell you. I had a couple quick questions. Did I pick up that the Cartograph system is about 50-50 mobile, or at least some handheld? Did I hear that?
It could be actually 100% mobile. And I'll let Chad answer a little bit more because he's gone a little bit more mobile than everybody else. It could be 100% mobile if I was to use my laptop, right? And we're wireless and whatever. It's more of getting it so that it's on a little smaller on your iPhone.
Yes.
To use, and they're carrying ladders and
Right.
everything else, so it makes it a little more clunky to try to carry a laptop around.
Yep, for sure.
So it's more getting that phone up to par with being able to, with full functionality.
And this software will get there, or is there?
They're working on it with
Okay.
it's called Cartograph One. Like Brandon mentioned there, they continue to tweak to
Right.
improve that.
And that's a free upgrade, did I hear? Did I hear that, anyone?
Yeah,
Free?
they do releases a couple times a year.
I have to ask. Yeah, probably not free, is my guess.
We still pay a yearly software fee,
Yeah.
so.
Okay. And then I'm just curious, like roughly, like not the absolute smallest, but like what asset classes, like what's one of the smaller items that we track to one of the bigger items? Is it, I don't need to know the thing, but like just roughly, what are we tracking and getting on this? Is it primarily the infrastructure HVAC stuff? Or is this like small mundane things too?
Yeah, for the most part, it's everything really. I mean, right from a boiler or chiller, which could be upwards of $1 million.
Right.
To, like I said, one of the PM tasks monthly is checking the fire extinguisher.
Right, okay. But it's mainly the infrastructure type things. It's not, this one doesn't track like computers, IT has that one that they're doing
Correct.
for that one.
Correct.
And then this one can be filed under the everyone's an expert category. We've been to the penthouse a couple times. It's a weird name for that thing, but it is weird. You do have an office there. That's bizarre, but, like we have, our staff will go in and do the PMs on that and check filters, or do we contract for that?
For the most part, that's our staff. There's some of the bigger ones with the chillers. There's certain things that companies come for. Some of the fire sprinkler testing.
Sure, yeah, yep,
Some
okay.
of that is contracted out. But majority of checking belts, filters is internal staff.
And when do we schedule commissioners skydiving in place in those air handlers? Is that still forthcoming?
That's too low. We'll take you to one of the towers.
Oh, boy. Be careful what you ask for. Okay, anything else in digital world or on site here? Not seeing anyone jumping to the forefront, so thanks for your effort and keeping us hot, keeping us cold, and keeping us, felt like Little Red Riding Hood, just right. Just right. I know the new building will be much easier, and this building will be much easier as well once we get through that. All right.